Well, good morning, Cypress. It is good to see everybody. It's good to have you all with us. I'm excited to be here, and we are in part 2 of this series called My Christmas Playlist, right? And so you just heard this song that is actually from my literal Christmas playlist, a song called Christmas is Here by an artist named J.J. Heller. I'm just curious, how many of you have ever heard that song before I shared it with you, maybe in my email on Friday? So you've heard this song before? Awesome. So you haven't. Okay, you haven't heard it before. Okay, so it's new. It's new for a lot of us. All right, good. It's always fun to share something new that I've discovered and enjoy so much, and enjoy sharing that with all of you. So I love that song. It's become one of my favorites for a lot of reasons. I'm going to say more about that in just a little bit. But before I dive into the teaching this morning, I just want to comment a little bit on the video we saw a few minutes ago. So as you heard in the video, we have a lot of plans, a lot of hopes and dreams for this year's year-end offering. And so through the month of December, we are just encouraging everyone, and I'm inviting all of you to prayerfully consider how you're going to participate in the offering this year. And now, starting last week, we've already had a few of you who've stepped into this and made some contributions. Amanda and I have made part of our gift already this year. And so where we are today, we are about $2,000, just a little over $2,000 that's been received so far in the year-end offering. So that's a small step, but a good step forward toward our goal of $75,000, as you heard in the video. And we're just going to keep trusting and believing and keep encouraging you, again, to prayerfully consider how you're going to participate this year. And I truly believe that we will meet that goal when all of us step into this together and we all give something according to how God is moving us to give. And so as you reach that point when you're ready to make that gift, the simplest way to give is by going to that webpage that I mentioned, cypressmeadows.org/YEO, right? Year-end offering, just YEO. And when you go to that page, when you give through the button on that page, it automatically makes sure that that gift is designated to the year-end offering. So it truly is the simplest way. Now, if you want to give some other way, through cash or check or whatever, you can also designate those gifts, YEO 2023, and we'll make sure that it gets it to the right place. And Cypress, thank you. Thank you to those who've already given. Thank you to those who I know are going to give and just haven't yet. And one of the things that Amanda and I have noticed in the short time we've been with you, just over the last year or so, is that you are an incredibly generous people. And it truly is inspiring, and I just want to say thank you. So, all right, well, I want to come back to that song that we listened to and a few minutes ago, because really, truly, this has become one of my favorite Christmas songs, probably just in the last year or two. And I don't know if it'll ever end up on anyone else's playlist. I don't know if it'll become one of your favorite songs or not, but really, where we are right now, we can't argue with what the song says, because we are like 2 weeks away. Christmas is here, right? It is here. And one of the things that I love about that song is that it reminds me of all the anticipation I felt as a kid every year when we got into December, right? Because it's like we're in the month of Christmas now, and that's when the countdown begins. And I remember as a kid just feeling like all this excitement and almost this like longing in my soul, because for me, as a kid, the countdown didn't start on December 1st. The countdown for me started on December 26th of last year. Right? And so I've been waiting for and longing for this day all year long. And when it finally arrived, there was so much joy, right? Do you remember that as a kid? Or maybe you still experience that? There's so much joy because that day that we'd been waiting for and longing for all year, it was finally here. Christmas was finally here. And when we get right down to it, that experience is really at the heart of the joy that we find and we experience at Christmas every single year. It's this idea, and I put this on the screens for us so we could really, I don't want us to miss this, but it's this idea that the arrival of something long expected and longed for brings joy, right? The arrival of something long expected and longed for brings joy. And anyone who's expecting a baby knows this, right? Because you are longing for that day when your due date arrives, your child arrives. Or maybe high school and college seniors, you understand this as well, because you're looking forward to that day on the calendar, and you're excited about that graduation day that's coming at some point, right? Or for those of you, those couples who are engaged to be married, you get this too, because, you're watching the calendar and you're checking off the days and you're anticipating and you're longing for your wedding day. And when that day or that moment finally arrives, there's so much joy that comes with it, right? When that longing has been fulfilled, there's always so much joy that comes with it. And all of us have experienced this in some way, haven't we? We've all experienced this. I have this experience every time Amanda and I are apart from each other, right? And this has happened quite a few times this year, maybe a little more than other years for whatever reason. I'm not really sure why that is, but we've spent a little time apart this year, and the longest time was like 2 weeks back in July when Amanda was up in Indiana visiting some family, and I was here at home where I'm supposed to be. And 2 weeks apart, and I remember, every day just counting down the days, just longing for the day when Amanda was home and we were together again. And when that day finally arrived, I have a whole other playlist for those occasions. It's my old school mixtape playlist that has all the best love songs on it, right? Chicago and Norah Jones, Adele, it's good stuff. But there's joy in those moments, right? Because there's joy when a deep longing has been fulfilled. Now, the challenge for us with this, especially around this time of year, is that we have this tendency to confuse joy with things that we can purchase and package and place under the tree. Right? And we do this. In fact, I read something that Americans will spend hundreds of billions of dollars on Christmas this year. Hundreds, and I said that right, hundreds of bajillions of dollars will be spent by Americans on Christmas this year. In fact, it's like $750 billion, according to the source that I looked at. And we'll spend that money on decorations, we'll spend it on food and travel, and of course, most of that gets spent on the presents that we put under the tree. Because, we want to bring joy at Christmas time, right? We want to make sure that everybody's Christmas dreams come true and that our kids get everything they've been longing for all year. And by now, we all know this, that, as magical and wonderful as that is, at some point, it's over, right? And it passes. And then it's just mountains of wrapping paper and stacks of bills, right? And then sometime between the cleanup and the travel home, some of that magic just kind of fades away. And we just slide right back into life per the usual, now with some new shiny stuff, but we start our countdown all over again for next year. And everybody thinks back on that, it was wonderful, it was magical, and everybody was happy, but is that really joy? Right? Is that really joy? Because now I'm not saying here, I'm not saying that we shouldn't do nice things or give nice things to our family and to our children. I'm not saying that there's not real joy in giving, because I truly believe that there is. But what I am saying is that the joy of Christmas has far less to do with presents under the tree and so much more to do with the presence of a person. And it goes back to that idea that I shared with you earlier, right? That the arrival of something or someone long expected and longed for brings us joy, brings real and true joy. It brings joy to those who are waiting, to those who are expecting. And when we make our way back to the Christmas story in the scriptures, we find a world in waiting. We find a young couple expecting. And we all know the story, right? It doesn't matter if you grew up in the church or not. It doesn't matter if you have faith in God or not. We've all heard the story that Joseph took his wife Mary to Bethlehem because there was a census going on in the world at that time. And so when they arrived in this tiny village that was like 90 miles away from their home, they find the place just jammed with people, and there's no rooms available. So they ended up in a stable. And they settled right in next to the sheep and the donkeys and the livestock there, and that's where Mary gave birth to her firstborn son. And they named him Jesus. And for Mary and Joseph, this was one of those long-expected moments, this moment that this deep longing that had been fulfilled for them, because the day that they had been anticipating for months, it was finally here, and their son was finally here, and so they were filled with incredible joy as Mary laid him to sleep in a feeding trough, which is what a manger is, right? A feeding trough. But there was joy in that moment. Now, the real joy and the real drama of joy in this story, however, is what happened shortly after the birth of Jesus. It's what happened in the fields outside of Bethlehem that were surrounding Bethlehem. And I want to read this for us. This is from the book of Luke in chapter 2, starting in verse 8. That night in a field near Bethlehem, shepherds were watching over their flocks. Suddenly an angel of the Lord appeared in radiant splendor before them, lighting up the field with the blazing glory of God, and the shepherds were terrified. But the angel reassured them, saying, "Don't be afraid, for I have come to bring you good news, the most joyous news the world has ever heard, and it is for everyone, everywhere. For today in Bethlehem, a rescuer was born for you. He is the Lord Yahweh. Yahweh, the Hebrew word for God that was so sacred they wouldn't even say it out loud. And this is who this angel is declaring this baby to be, the Lord Yahweh, the Messiah. And you will recognize him by this miraculous sign. You will find a baby wrapped in strips of cloth and lying in the feeding trough. Then all at once in the night sky, a vast number of glorious angels appeared, the very armies of heaven, and they all praised God, singing, "Glory to God in the highest realms of heaven. For there is peace and a good hope given to the sons of men." Now, I want to pause here for just a moment. We're going to come back to this here in just a little bit. But the scene is fascinating. I mean, think about this. We have this group of shepherds. They're just watching their sheep in the fields that night. And then out of nowhere, this angel shows up. And he has a message from God just for them. Right? There's like nobody else in the fields. There's just these shepherds. And the angel has this message for them. And he says, "I have good news for you. I have good news." In fact, he says that this news is going to bring so much joy to everyone, everywhere. It's like the best news ever. And the reason why this is such good news is because, and we talked about this a little bit last week, that for thousands of years, the ancient prophets of Israel had spoken and written down these words of promise, these words of prophecy from God that someday he would send a Messiah. Someone who would come to rescue broken people, and someone who would restore a broken world. And that word, spoken by the prophets long ago, had become flesh that very night in Bethlehem. And it moved into the neighborhood, so to speak. In other words, that baby in Bethlehem was God in a body. God in a tiny infant body. And what the angels are saying to the shepherds here is that he is the one the world has been waiting for all this time, the long-expected Savior of us all, and he is finally here. It's finally happened. And there was so much joy over this longing fulfilled in Bethlehem, and that a vast multitude of angels just filled the sky, and they just had to sing it out loud and sing it out clear because Jesus, the Messiah, the Savior of the world, was finally here. Christmas is here. And the truth in the angel's message that I don't want us to miss this holiday season is this. And again, I have it on the screens for us. That the deepest longing in our hearts, finds its fulfillment in the arrival and the presence of Jesus. The deepest longings. Now listen, I'm not saying that every longing, right? I'm not saying every longing because I know that we have real and practical needs, right? And some of us, we find ourselves in these situations where we are just waiting and hoping and longing for something real and practical and tangible to answer those needs for us. And so I'm not saying every longing, but yes, I do believe that God can and he does provide those things, but I also know that platitudes aren't always helpful when we find ourselves in those circumstances. But our deepest longings, those longings for unconditional love, and that aching in our soul for purpose and a life of meaning and significance, our spiritual longing for wholeness and salvation, all of these deep longings in our soul, they find their fulfillment in the arrival and the presence of Jesus. And Christmas reminds us that Jesus truly is the joy of every longing heart. And now, going back to the scriptures and picking up in verse 15, look what happens here. When the choir of angels disappeared and returned to heaven, the shepherds said to one another, "Let's go. Let's hurry and find this word who was born in Bethlehem and see for ourselves what the Lord has revealed to us." So they hurried off and found their way to Mary and Joseph, and there was the baby lying in a feeding trough. Upon seeing this miraculous sign, the shepherds recounted what had just happened. Everyone who heard the shepherd's story was astonished by what they were told. But Mary treasured all these things in her heart and often pondered what they meant. The shepherds returned to their flock, ecstatic over what had happened. They praised God and glorified him for all they had heard and seen for themselves, just like the angel had said. And I love what the angels do here in this part of the story, right? I mean, this is just awesome because after experiencing the glory of God light up the fields that night, and after witnessing the angel appearing to them and sharing this incredibly good and joyous news with them, and then after seeing the sky just fill with angels singing over them, what do? I mean, they said to each other, let's go, right? I mean, this sounds like my teenage kids when they get excited. Let's go, you know? And then they left from there and they went searching for the baby. They went looking for the baby, and I just love that. I mean, it's like they were so filled with joy at the news of this miraculous birth that they just had to go see it for themselves. And you know what? I think that you would probably do the exact same thing, wouldn't you? I think you would. Of course you would. And here's why I think that's true, and maybe you've noticed this, that joy just cannot sit still. Have you noticed this? Joy just can't sit still. I mean, joy has to move, you know, it has to dance, and joy has to sing, and it has to shout. It's like joy just has to make itself known, right? And as I thought about this, and I just thought how I wanted to bring this short teaching to a close this morning, and this is a little bit of a shorter teaching this morning because in just a moment I'm going to hand things over to our founding pastor, Douglas Poole, and so before I get to that though, I wanted to bring this to a close with a challenge, and here's where I wanted to land this morning. Because here's what stood out to me in this teaching. And it's another thought, another idea that I put on the screens for us. It's that joy isn't fully experienced until it's been shared with someone else. I mean, joy isn't even fully experienced until we share it with someone else, right? I mean, and I think you already know this because I think you're probably already doing this maybe without even realizing it. Because anytime we experience joy, I mean, our first impulse is to talk about it, isn't it? I mean, think about this. Anytime we hear good news, what do? We share it. We pick up the phone, right? I mean, we yell into the next room, whoever's sitting in there, and we tell them about it. Or we post it on social media. I mean, again, we have this joy, and it just won't sit still. And that joy isn't even fully experienced until we share it with someone else. And that's exactly what the shepherds did after they found Jesus. They experienced so much joy when they found him, and they just couldn't sit still. They couldn't stop talking about it, and they had to go and tell anyone and everyone who would listen everything that they had seen and heard. And their joy spread to those around them. And so before I hand things over to Douglas here in just a moment, I want to leave you with this challenge. How are you experiencing joy this season? And how are you sharing that joy with someone else? Maybe you're sharing it through your words like the shepherds did and just telling others about it. Maybe you're sharing joy through time spent with those around you. Maybe it's something that you're giving to others this Christmas. Whatever it is, how are you going to share your joy with someone else during the season? Because I believe the beautiful thing about the joy that we find in every longing fulfilled is that it's not just something we get to benefit us, but it's an opportunity to pass that joy on to others so that our joy can somehow infect others and become their joy. And so again, how are we doing that this Christmas? How are you going to share the joy that you found with someone else?